The wonderful All Souls Church here, where Langham Place becomes Portland Place, and a really good marker for the start of today's walk. Built in 1820, I think the architect was John Nash, part of the Portland estate development. And here we have the rather grand Langham Hotel. And a dinner took place here, which is sort of behind the main driving point for today's walk. It was here that Sir Arthur Conan Doyle, as it would have been then, had dinner with Oscar Wilde. And as a result of that dinner, Oscar Wilde went away and wrote The Picture of Dorian Gray. And Conan Doyle went away and wrote his second Sherlock Holmes story. What I love about doing these walks around London is I've turned around the corner just to find somewhere quiet to do a piece to camera, and look, I'm confronted with this beautiful building here, the Medical Society of London, founded in 1773. Not in any of my reading on the area, it's just here. Wow. So today we're going to go for a walk around Marylebone. Mary-a-le-Bourne. Mary, St.Mary, St.Mary at the Tyburn, or St.Mary at the Bourne. Mary at Bourne. Mary at the Bourne. Mary at the Bourne, the Bourne being the river Tyburn, gives us Marylebone, Marylebone. And of course, one of the most famous streets in Marylebone is Baker Street. A street that most people know. That's got to be one of the most famous streets in London because, as you know, look, who lived in Baker Street? Sherlock Holmes lived at 221B, Baker Street, a completely fictional address. There's never been a 221B, but it doesn't matter, it's a good story. So that's going to be, this is not really a Sherlock Holmes walk as such because there's not a lot of Sherlock Holmes associations in Marylebone. There's the Langham back there because it's where Conan Doyle had dinner with Oscar Wilde. You've got Baker Street Station. I'm giving it all away now. And you've got a couple of other places. You've got Dr. Watson's practice. You've got Conan Doyle's practice, which I think is up there. Harley Street. Let's do that straight away. Is it Harley Street or Upper Wimpole Street? Harley Street is where Dr. Watson was. And the basic structure for a chunk of the walk will be from this book here, London Walks by Tom Pocock, which I think was published in 1960. I want to say 1965. I'll put the date on here, but I've used this a couple of times for my Wapping walk and actually my first Soho walk. Hasn't got all the places I want to go, but it's a really good walk in here. I'm going to add a few bits on for my own sake, like Wimpole Mews, which he does mention. Who knows what happened in Wimpole Mews, another very famous address in Marylebone. Anyway, there's a couple of other places that I'll add in from the London Compendium, but this is our walk today with around Marylebone, Baker Street. I think he calls it Baker Street in here. Tom Pocock's walk starts here in Wigmore Street, which I've always quite liked, but he says apparently Dickens really wasn't a fan of Wigmore Street, found it kind of quite dismal. And it is a 18th century development, and I think one of the things that people didn't like about it is the uniformity of it. The kind of straight blocks and the grid-like nature. Intersected, of course, by Marylebone High Street, Marylebone Lane, which is the course of the River Tyburn. So we'll turn off Wigmore Street into Marylebone Lane. And Marylebone Lane basically follows the course of the River Tyburn. It's running beneath the street here, and you'll find a video of that walk on my channel. So Marylebone Lane now is quite chic-y. I don't want to use the word fashionable because I tend to think it's quite hard for chic-y places to be fashionable. Something not really cool as such, but you know what I mean. They've got the Ivy Cafe over there, there's the Chiltern Firehouse, those kind of places. But this was once the village, the manor, the medieval village of Marylebone, belonged to the Knights Templar. Then it passed into the hands of a member of the court of Henry VII, and then it becomes a hunting ground for Henry VIII. He seems to have hunted absolutely everywhere, doesn't he? Marylebone Lane really does have the meanders of the course of a river, doesn't it? And here's actually quite a useful map. We've just come out here on the junction of Marylebone Lane and Marylebone High Street. And the thing not in Tom Pocock's Walk one of the Mains is the Wallace collection down there, which I've never been to the Wallace collection, which is terrible.
We like to
And it's interesting, Wimpole Mews is clearly, obviously wouldn't be on there, but surely it's got to be a major destination, surely. And you've got the wonderfully straight Marylebone High Street here. And you can see what a smart part of town it is. Very busy this evening on a Saturday evening. It's been a beautiful hot day, everyone's out. And this is Manchester Square, and do you know what? I think I've only ever been here once before at Manchester Square. Incredible, isn't it? I remember walking past the Wallace collection one time. So here we have the Wallace collection, which is contained within Hertford House, built in 1777 for the Marquis of Manchester. The collection was started then. A collection of grand masters that includes 775 paintings, and there's porcelain and furniture and all sorts in there. Said to be wonderful. Never been, as I say, never been in there. And it became a public gallery in 1900, opened by the Prince of Wales. So we'll walk up Manchester Street, but I want to go to Wimpole Mews before we go to Baker Street and do all of that. And we've got some wonderful kind of we've got some interesting wartime history around Baker Street, Devonshire Place and the area around Marylebone Station. Going down Blandford Street now with the large Catholic church over on the right hand side there. And here you've got some houses which look like they may be from that original 18th century development. What's interesting from the bit of reading I've done is that we're comparing this development to similar developments of its age, like Bloomsbury, like Soho, like Mayfair. People don't seem to have spoken highly about Marylebone. I can't find that anywhere. In fact, quite the opposite. I'll tell you what Nelson thought about Baker Street when we get there. This is New Cavendish Street. Very broad, grand, almost like a boulevard, isn't it? It's almost like a French boulevard. Wow, what a beautiful building. So here it is, Wimpole Mews, scene of the biggest British political scandal of the 20th century, and one of the biggest political scandals in Britain, I would say, of all time. Let's go and have a look at number 17, and I'll tell you about it elsewhere. So this is number 17, Wimpole Mews, and it looks like they've must have completely rebuilt it. It doesn't look like it's the original Mews building at all, does it? I might be wrong. It'd be interesting to compare it to the recent Netflix adaptation of that story, or version of that story, I should say, not adaptation. There was that I watched recently and made me think about coming down here. I won't tell you the story whilst we're stood outside, because that feels really poor taste for some reason, but I'll tell you about it as we leave. So number 17, Wimpole Mews, was the home of the osteopath, Stephen Ward, society osteopath in the 1960s. And Stephen Ward had a number of very well-to-do clients, including the Soviet naval attaché. He also had living with him a young, how should we say, dancer, party girl. She denies the allegation of being a cool girl, and always did, but she was described as a cool girl in the subsequent furore. And she lived with Ward. He met her at a famous club, was it Murray's Club? And there was another young girl that he also met there called Mandy Rice-Davies, and they all lived with Ward there. Unusual arrangement, you might say, for an osteopath. And he introduced Christine Keeler to his clients. Some people say he was supplying them with working girls, cool girls, whatever you want to call them. Some people say that he was supplying his wealthy clients not only with issues with remedies for their aching bones, but also with there's a terrible pun there, but also with services that these young ladies provided. And it so happened that British intelligence is said to have seen the opportunity to have compromised the Ivanov, the Soviet naval attaché, with his activities with Christine Keeler, and they were keen for that to happen, for them to then turn him to become a British asset. At the same time, Ward also introduced Christine Keeler to John Profumo, then Minister for War. And it turns out then Christine Keeler was both having an affair with the British Minister for War and the Russian, the Soviet naval attaché, which didn't look good. The whole thing kind of exploded, partly by accident. At the end of 1962 into 1963, Profumo famously stands in front of Parliament, denies any contact or any impropriety between him and Christine Keeler. 3 months later, he's forced to retract that. It becomes an enormous, enormous scandal because Profumo is seen to be the natural next Prime Minister. He destroys his political career. I've mentioned this in the video when I walked along the Thames, or I walked near Cliveden, because that is where they met. They were introduced to each other near Cliveden. My dad used to do bits of gardening work up there around that time, which is interesting, cross over into my life. So it becomes a huge scandal. Ward is then put on trial. Everyone's put on trial, basically. Keeler's put on trial, Mandy Rice-Davies, I think, avoids going on trial. She's also on trial. Stephen Ward is put on trial on what some people say were trumped up charges of living off immoral earnings, and he ends up taking his own life because he can't deal with the shame and the scandal and the complete downfall, where all the society people that he had treated over the years just deserted him. People that accepted his hospitality, accepted the favours that he provided. He was left stranded and alone, and he ended up taking his own life. It's a really tragic, sad story. No one come out of it with any credit. Maybe Mandy Rice-Davies, she released a single and became a bit of a pop star, didn't she? I think Mandy Rice-Davies is the one that probably was quite unrepentant. What happened to Ivanov is the question. But anyway, Wimpole Mews, that's where it all happens. It all centres around there. It's where the parties were, it's where the girls lived with Stephen Ward, it's where Ivanov visited, Profumo visited there, Johnny Edgecombe goes there, shoots up the place. That goes into the newspapers, and that's when the press get involved. Interesting place. A little bit disappointed, if I was honest with you. The Netflix dramatisation that was on recently, I don't think it was very good, personally, although it's a lot more thorough than the film. But there is a 1980s film with Stephen Ward, played by John Hurt, who's fantastic, and Joanne Whaley as Christine Keeler. I think the cast was much better in the film version. Very good, I recommend that one. But the Netflix dramatisation goes into more detail because it's like 6 or 7 parts. So, turning into Wimpole Street, and I don't know if it's ironic or not, but now we're looking for one of the most romantic addresses in British literary history. Number 50 Wimpole Street, which is where Elizabeth Barrett conducted her secret relationship with Robert Browning, both of them poets, against the wishes of her tyrannical father, who opposed the match. I guess Robert Browning probably wasn't a good fit for his daughter, but they persisted nonetheless, and they got married at the church at St. Marylebone, St. Mary-a-le-Bourne, St. Mary's Church at the end of the street. Again, I believe, in secret. Tennyson also wrote a poem here in memorandum about the death of his friend. I don't think he was very fond of Wimpole Street. I think he talked about being a long, straight, unlovely street. Whereas Virginia Woolf actually really liked Wimpole Street. It's also where Wilkie Collins passed away. And down the street at number 27A was where Professor Higgins teaches Eliza Doolittle to pronounce her words properly. I've probably just mispronounced some words in that sentence, in fact, in Pygmalion.
We return to Marylebone High Street.
And then we're going to go through Paddington Square Gardens and then to Baker Street, Sherlock Holmes, and a very special Second World War location. I mean, this really is where all the rich people hang out. Not all the rich people hang out, but this really is where rich people hang out. I've never seen such shishi posh pubs in my life. So if you want to come to the area where people with money come to eat and drink and shop, this is it. But here is the wonderful Daunt Books, the famous Daunt Books. I feel like I have to go inside. I don't know, have I been in here before? If I have, it was a long time ago. I mean, of course I have been in there. The famous, when you see the famous room with the glass ceiling, it's stunning. And I remember going to look at that. It's still a long time ago though, I think. I feel like it's a long time ago, but you now have that spectacle. It's full of tourists, partly because there's loads of tourists stay around here and there's no shops open. So see people trying to find something to do with their kids, which is quite funny. But then the spectacle, a little bit like you see in Paris at Shakespeare & Co, where tourists are going in there to buy a tote bag. You see the Daunt books, tote bags everywhere. So, but even so, it gets people into bookshops. A lot of them will pick up a book whilst they're there. Really beautiful. So we'll turn into Paddington Street and we're heading now towards Baker Street. This is the Church of the Good Shepherd and St. Mary-a-le-Bourne. It's Nottingham Place. Isn't this delightful? This is Paddington Street Garden, which Tom Pocock mentions in passing as a former burial ground. Isn't it lovely? So opened as a public gardens in 1885 by the London Public Gardens Association. Burial stopped in 1814, and these are the original London plane and lime trees. Really beautiful. It's a real treasure. This is the Fitzpatrick family mausoleum. The other burial places, gravestones were removed when it was converted into a public garden. This statue is called the Street Orderly Boy, presented in 1948. Chiltern Street. We must be getting close to Baker Street because here we have Sherlock Mews. Kenrick Place down there. So here we have it, Baker Street. Where's Sherlock Holmes? Now I imagine this isn't a lot of people's image of Baker Street when they come here looking for Sherlock Holmes. This doesn't fit the template, does it? And a lot of what we today call Baker Street wasn't originally called Baker Street at the time that Conan Doyle was writing. There certainly wasn't a 221B. The numbers didn't go above 100 in his time. Down here at number 64 you had the headquarters of the Special Operations Executive, the wartime special operations executive, set up for spying and sabotage and general clandestine operations, spies basically. And that became a template for a lot of modern intelligence agencies. I believe the CIA grew out of their experiences of working with the SOE. When Nelson wrote to his wife from the battlefield asking her to find a flat in London, he said, as long as it's not in Baker Street, I detest. He wrote, I detest Baker Street. And this part here, north of Paddington Street, was known as York Place. And the bit on the other side of the Marylebone Road was known as Upper Baker Street. But that is where people have located 221B, which is what we're going to have a look at, because I think that is now the Sherlock Holmes Museum. And you can see this part of Baker Street does lack a certain romance, doesn't it? And it's really noisy. It's often choked with traffic and buses. And we're talking about here, this is like about 8:30 on a Saturday night. Imagine what it's like, you know, in the midst of the workday week. The Globe pub, which is one of the great landmarks of Marylebone, Baker Street. And here we have Baker Street Station, which is where Sherlock Holmes set off on many of his investigations from this station here. And here we have the wonderful statue of Sherlock Holmes, funded by the Abbey National Building Society for the Sherlock Holmes Society of London, stood outside Baker Street Station. And I've always been fascinated by Chiltern Court here, which is where H.G. Wells lived and worked here between 1930 and 1936. It's a really wonderful kind of Art Deco apartment block, a massive one. Unfortunately, it's all covered in scaffolding at the moment. So this building here in Upper Baker Street, or what was once Upper Baker Street, has been identified by the Sherlock Holmes experts through much discussion and debate and looking at the landscape of London at the time that Conan Doyle was writing. It's been decided that somehow this is 221B, this is where Sherlock Holmes and Dr. Watson operated from. I think to do with the fact that the number of upstairs windows, there are 2 upstairs windows and not 3. There you go, that's what it came down to. All those great stories, over 60 I think, at least 60 Sherlock Holmes stories emanate from here. Wonderful stories. I've read about 3 collections of Sherlock Holmes stories and I loved them. So this is wonderful. This the pub, it's now a school I think, but it's the Gloucester Arms pub and there's a bit of local history here. So the name of the Gloucester Arms recalls the early years of the 19th century when Georgian dandies used to saunter through nearby Regent's Park to the cockpits and gaming houses of Marylebone. Isn't that great? The nobleman whose arms are commemorated by the pub sign was Frederick, Duke of Gloucester, who was a nephew of George Nash, who designed Regent's Park. And a lot more fluff. Great. So now we're going to head up Malcolm Street. I've got 2 more places at least. No, well, just 2 more places on my Marylebone walking tour. This is Siddons Lane. There's so many intriguing little lanes and muses around Marylebone, isn't there? This is just another. It's down here as well that the first independent contact lens company was formed. There you go. I think this is one of the most beautiful apartment blocks in London, isn't it? What a real kind of Art Deco masterpiece that is. Absolutely stunning. This is Glentworth Street. So this is the wartime location I've been teasing since the beginning of the video. Number 1 Dorset Square. And there's a plaque just to the left of the door that tells us more about it. Sometimes it's quite poignant to read these rather than interpret it. And it's a plaque that says this plaque was erected to commemorate the deeds of the men and women of the Free French forces and their British comrades who left from this house on special missions to enemy-occupied France and to honour those who did not return. And bearing in mind they were special operative spies, and of course they wouldn't have been treated as prisoners of war if they were captured. So their fate was quite dark if they didn't succeed. Very courageous people, and underneath a plaque that says this plaque was unveiled by Her Majesty the Queen Mother, 15th of June 1957. So this feels like the natural place for our walk to end at one of the great London stations. If ever asked which is my favourite London station, I naturally say Marylebone, because it's the station that I used to use to travel back from my place of my birth where I grew up and into London. Gateway to the Chilterns, the Marylebone, opened in 1899. Originally to connect London with stations further north, but ultimately now it runs as far as Birmingham. And now Bicester Village is the main location people go out to. It's mad. The trains there now are packed because of people travelling to Bicester Village. But it's a wonderful, beautiful station. Small, manageable, really beautiful. I love Marylebone Station. And of course it's not really part of the landscape of Sherlock Holmes, or is it? I mean, Tom Pocock relates it to Sherlock Holmes and says you can see him swishing through in his cape. I'm actually going to give an honourable mention to this little cafe here. It's called Egg and Bacon beneath that awning. And it's been the same for as long as I've been coming to London, certainly since an 18-year-old. And that would often be the first place I'd stop to get an egg and bacon roll. And by the looks of it, the menu has not changed in, 40 years nearly. I've never walked down here, down Boston Place. It runs along the side of Marylebone Station. It's Marylebone Station there. I hope you enjoyed that stroll around Marylebone and Baker Street looking for Sherlock Holmes, the world of Sherlock Holmes. I really enjoyed that. I've been wanting to do this little video for a while actually. And I've been in the area a bit recently, haven't I, with the Circle Line walk, and it feels like the Fitzrovia walk wasn't far away, certainly from where we started at the Langham. And then we did the Virginia Woolf walk, which went up to Regent's Park. So it's nice when I'm able to fill in gaps. And then I did a walk, was it October 2023 when I'd been on the BBC radio on a couple of shows there, and then I did a walk, a Remembrance Sunday walk, where I walked down Wigmore Street to Hyde Park Corner. So, you know, it's nice for me to fill in those bits, and obviously those walks will be linked below. So, as ever, thank you so much for joining me on that walk. I hope you enjoyed it. I loved it, and yeah, thank you to my supporters on Patreon, the YouTube members, thank you to you, turning into either place now, another place I've never been, to you for watching and your comments. There'll be some good comments on this one. All the pubs I missed. There were loads of people standing outside the pubs drinking. So if you film them, people get a little bit touchy about that now, or they're certainly going to say something. So it's a bit, and they're like clouds of people. So you can't really do that. I feel like there should be, I feel like I'm starting another video now. But Balcombe Street, is this Marylebone? I'm going to carry on walking down Ivor Street. I'll do some footage to go over this prattling. So yeah, thanks to everyone who supports this work. And as I always like to say, I look forward to seeing you on the next walk, wherever that may be. And I've got a list, obviously. It just keeps getting longer. So where do you want to see me next? I know, New River. I know, New River. New River. It's got to be the New River, hasn't it? Soon.
It's over the meadow, over the stream. It's where I am going and where I have been. It's been a long day now. It's time for a beer. And now for home, of course I must steer. It's over